So thanks again, candidate Thomas, for doing this interview with us. We really appreciate it. The first of my questions is, what steps would you take to make New Orleans infrastructure and public spaces more accessible to all residents? And how would you ensure that people with disabilities are at the table when decisions are being made about the city's built environment?
I think one of the things we need to do is build on the ADA, especially 1990 ADA, even though some changes have been made. Once that whole trend and that whole movement stopped, a lot of the advancements, there's still places and spaces that people can't easily access. So how do we make New Orleans a place where even folk with physical disabilities they don't feel like they're places they can't go or places they're not wanted. The other thing is not having a seat at the table, but I would like folk like you and Mr. Roca to be part of my transition, to not have a seat at the table, but to help build the new table, as well as recommend people who are qualified from the disabilities community to be considered to have positions within the new administration. When you see yourself as part of something, then especially if you're a reflection of people who have the same life, then they're a lot more confident that they not only have a place in a space, but a voice. The other thing is the World Economic Forum, in their economic report, I think it was in 2023, I don't know if maybe that was a National Council on Disability report, talks about the estimated contribution of people with disabilities is in the trillions of dollars. So I don't think we've made a good enough argument saying that, hold on a second, we're costing ourselves millions and billions and internationally trillions by not creating space for people with disabilities. So I would like to be able to lead with the economic argument that why cut off our nose and spite our face? The more with disabilities, especially those who are qualified, the more they participate in our economy, we're actually helping our economy. And we're helping the GDP.
Yeah, it's great. And that brings me into the second question, and you sort of touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. How will you support economic opportunities for residents with disabilities, and what steps would you take to ensure that jobs across the city, including city jobs and contracts, are truly inclusive and equitable?
Well, you want to make sure that the Home Rule Charter and how we operate reflects that discrimination against people for disabilities is not something that we want, that they should be a protected class, similar to what we've done with the domestic partnership. What I've just done for the first time in history, we'll have a ballot measure for the charter to make sure that formerly incarcerated people cannot be discriminated against for economic opportunity and housing. But to be a voice to show, I mean, you're talking about when you look at employment, the obstacles for employment for people with disabilities are 50% of the number for folks who are employed. So if the World Economic Forum is saying that we're missing out on billions and trillions, right? I think once people begin to understand the economic argument, when you discriminate against somebody just because there's a disability, you're actually costing your community money. And have people with jobs that are representative of the administration in the city to let it be known that people with disabilities who are qualified are welcome to be part of the next administration.
Great. What is your vision for ensuring that residents with disabilities can access safe, affordable, and accessible housing in every neighborhood of the city? And would you address both affordability and physical accessibility in housing policy?
Well, to make sure that, first of all, there's access. If developers are using public funds, now we talk about the private community, we can't, as long as they adhere to basic ADA we can't make them, but we know still sometimes that doesn't go far enough. But if you're using municipal funds, then the requirement ought to be that folk with disabilities should be part of those contracts and those sites. And that once those buildings and structures are completed, that they have access to applications to be part, to have that housing, to be part of that housing. And I would be a leading voice in making sure that happens, especially if they're using government funds.
So how would you work to expand access to mental health care in New Orleans, particularly community-based services? And what role do you see the city playing in preventing incarceration of people with mental health disabilities?
Well, it's very difficult for me to control what the state does. You're talking about the governor and the legislature versus a home rule charter in the city. But can we impact them with our voice and what we, and through our delegation, making sure that it's representative? That's going to be difficult this time, especially given the conservative nature of what's happening in Baton Rouge. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't have the fight to do that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't use our voice to do that. And but this is a real difficult time nationally. And when you talk about what's happening in Baton Rouge is acting more like a predator than a partner with our city. They're threatening to take it over. It seems like there's a demographic and racial divide that's being highlighted. We have a couple of Senate bills now that may affect our budget, 20 to $30 million. That's another fight. The Lieutenant Governor is threatening to take over the French Quarter. They're threatening to supersede us if we interfere with ICE raiding workforces. So, what I'm hoping is that we get a combination of advocates along with that delegation. And one of my fears is that we have senators and representatives who have developed seniority in Baton Rouge, who are running for local offices, who are going to weaken our seniority and weaken our ability at the state level while we're potentially under siege or under assault. So we lose folk who've developed some seniority in relationships in Baton Rouge. How does that weaken us at the state level with what you're talking about and I'm talking about, especially with the threats that are being made already? I don't know that we've thought about that.
And this is my final question, and I know it's a difficult question as well. But how would you advocate for more equitable access to Medicaid and other healthcare supports for New Orleanians with disabilities? And what types of policies would you oppose or support?
Well, I'm going to deal with the mental health thing too before I close out with that. I started a show called Mentally Speaking as the host of the morning show on WBOK 10 years ago. Mental health and the conversation around it is trending now. But just like I started working with Charlie Toubre decades ago, before it became popular to advocate for folk with disabilities because of the history of my family, I had mental health experts on my show for the last 10 years, from Dr. Turner, Dr. Shervington, Dr. Arnold James, Victor Sims, who's a co-host of Mentally Speaking. So, and that was in conversations with people like the late Carl Segura and others about the trauma that we experienced here in New Orleans, where mental health has never been a priority. So I actually led the way. No other elected official has started a platform. Many have jumped on board now, but my show, Mentally Speaking, started 10 years ago. And it's still a show on WBOK, even though I had to stop hosting it because I'm running for office. Now, and the other part is, what do we do moving forward to ensure access? I think if my cabinet is reflective of people who've overcome disabilities and contribute to society, they'll see a mayor who has that person on their staff. If contractors and business people need city subsidies, municipal subsidies, to let them know that they can't discriminate against folk with disabilities, that the expectation is that everyone who can do the work and who qualifies to do the work should have an opportunity. And I think one of the most important things I can do is, and I use it to lead the discussion of why formerly incarcerated people should not be excluded, is because we're not helping ourselves economically. Once you call out a certain part of the community and you say they can't participate in certain sectors, we're hurting ourselves economically. And I'm gonna be a leading voice educating people that people with disabilities contribute trillions of dollars to the international economy and millions and billions of dollars to our local and our US economy. So why would we cut off our nose to spite our face? Why wouldn't we grant access?
Well, thank you so much for your time today, candidate Thomas. We really appreciate it. We do have one or two questions after this, but I'm going to start recording now. Do you have?
Yeah, I want to deal with the state piece too, because even though many states have passed minimum wage laws that increase minimum wage or wages, and some folk with disabilities who work with benefit that, they don't take into consideration the challenge that the disability has. So even though you've increased the wage, then they don't take into consideration that the wage doesn't account for the extra cost that the person has because of the disability. So I would hope that we can educate our legislature, especially in a right to work state, that when they begin to deal with Medicaid and certain special circumstances, that they could take that into consideration. So if you don't adjust the benefits, the income increase really doesn't do anything because it's eaten up by the fact that folk with disabilities need special benefits or more care.
Right.
And very few people understand that.
That is very true. Before we end the interview, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I mean, just and I would love to be the kind of mayor, man, that would honor Charlie's legacy, especially given my relationship with him. And even deeper than that, the legacy of my family and my late sister, Juliet, so that her brother and Charlie's friend could be the person who helped close the gap in the disparity between the disabled community and the city of New Orleans and ultimately the state, the nation, and our world. So for me, as a college student, I used to raise money for people with disabilities through competition and games and stuff like that. And it would be an honor to be the mayor that honored his sister and honored his good friend, especially in this area.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you guys. Appreciate y'all.